Today, we're unpacking a highly controversial text published in 2008 from the Lifechanyuan movement, written by its founder, Shufeng. Now, our goal here isn't to take sides or endorse any specific theology. We're strictly putting on our neutral, impartial translator hats. We're going to objectively analyze how this fascinating source radically reinterprets ancient scriptures, map out the author's arguments, and really try to understand the exact logic driving this movement. Okay, let's dive into this explosive hook right out of the gate. According to the translated text, the author plainly states that the God depicted in the Old Testament is not the true creator at all, but is actually Satan. I mean, it's a massive, paradigm-shifting claim, right? And as neutral observers of the source material, our job today is to look at exactly how the author arrived at such a shocking conclusion. To do that, we'll follow this structured roadmap. First, a controversial theological claim. Second, the 8 divine characteristics. Third, critiquing the Old Testament. Fourth, timelines and biblical paradoxes. Fifth, Jesus, the heavenly rebel. And finally, the Lifechanyuan mission.
Section 1, a controversial theological claim. To really grasp this text, you have to understand why it was written in the first place. This was originally a secret document, but the author, Shufeng, published it publicly to defend his movement against critics who claimed it went against the ways of the true creator. The movement itself, Lifechanyuan, has a very specific goal: revering the greatest creator, life, and nature. According to the source, their overarching mission is the pursuit of happiness, freedom, and joy, and the ultimate spiritual aim, elevating a person's quality of life into what they call heavenly kingdoms, specifically citing places like the Thousand-Year World or the Elysium World.
Section 2, the 8 divine characteristics.
So the crucial point is that to prove his movement actually aligns with true divinity, the author establishes a very strict theological rubric. According to the text, the true greatest creator absolutely must possess these 8 specific traits: uniqueness, formlessness, neutrality, and mystery, along with justice, mercy, supreme power, and absolute wisdom. The author's argument is that if a divine being lacks even one of these characteristics, well, they simply cannot be the ultimate creator of the universe.
Section 3, critiquing the Old Testament. Now, the author aggressively applies those 8 divine characteristics directly to the Old Testament. It's kind of like a theological cross-examination. He points out what he sees as a glaring contradiction using the Bible's own words. Remember, the requirement is that the creator must be unique and gender-neutral. Yet in Genesis, God says, "Let us make man in our image." The text argues that the plural, us, means this God is not unique, but actually part of a multitude. Plus, this God is consistently presented with a masculine image, which means he completely fails the test of neutrality.
The cross-examination continues, this time looking at the concept of mystery. The source claims true divinity reveals its will strictly through the silent mechanics of nature and the universe. However, the document points out that the God of the Old Testament frequently speaks directly to humans using a physical voice. According to the author's logic, that kind of direct verbal communication violates the absolute rule that a true creator must be completely formless and mysterious.
And here we see the analysis tackling justice and mercy. The author argues that sending 10 plagues upon the Egyptians and killing their firstborns, even the children of impoverished servants, is a profound demonstration of injustice and a total lack of mercy. Furthermore, he claims that creating Eve from Adam's rib laid the historical foundation for the unequal status of women globally. All of this, the text concludes, proves the specific entity is neither fair nor completely wise.
Section 4, timelines and biblical paradoxes. Let's move to the math and see how this builds, because pivoting away from the moral arguments, the author now attacks the biblical narrative using historical logic. He calculates a highly specific timeline derived directly from biblical ages and eras. He adds up 1,656 years from creation to the flood, 857 years to the Exodus, 906 years to Babylon, 602 years to Jesus, and so on, all the way down to the 2008 years from Jesus to the writing of this text in 2008. When you add all those specific eras together, the author concludes that, according to a strict, literal reading of the Bible, human history is exactly 6,381 years old. And the text claims that this remarkably short timeline creates some massive logistical paradoxes. The author poses several pointed questions based entirely on this timeline. First up, if only Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel existed, and Cain was banished to the land of Nod after the murder, where did Cain's wife come from?
He asks whether Eve had another daughter, which would imply incest and inbreeding, or if there were already other humans on Earth, which would inherently contradict the biblical creation story in the first place.
This creates a second massive logistical hurdle, this time concerning Noah's Ark. If a global flood wiped out absolutely everyone, except a family of 8 just 4,700 years ago, how could human beings have possibly populated the Americas so fast? The text questions how a single, small Middle Eastern family could cross the freezing Bering Strait and then somehow evolve into entirely distinct racial groups in such an incredibly short window of time.
The author wraps up this particular section with a much broader rhetorical question. If there are over 2 billion Christians today, making up a massive portion of the global population, why is the world still so plagued by chaos, disorder, and suffering? The suggestion here is pretty clear. If humanity were truly following the ultimate creator, the world would already be a paradise.
Section 5. Jesus, the Heavenly Rebel.
Having attempted to completely dismantle the Old Testament God, the author now turns to the New Testament, and this is where the deductive logic really reaches its climax. The source quotes Matthew chapter 4, verse 8, where the devil tempts Jesus in the desert, offering him all the kingdoms of the world. And this brilliantly illustrates the author's point. He highlights that the devil literally couldn't offer Jesus the world unless the devil already owned it. Therefore, the text deduces that Satan is the actual architect and ruler of this physical world, perfectly matching the creator described in Genesis.
So here is the massive theological twist. The source claims that the Heavenly Father Jesus constantly spoke of was definitely not the God of the Old Testament. Instead, Jesus' Father is the true greatest creator, the one with those 8 divine characteristics we looked at earlier. According to this author, Jesus was sent to earth specifically to oppose and rebel against the Old Testament God, whom the text identifies as Satan.
To support this rather wild idea, the author points to exactly how Jesus operated. The argument frames Jesus as a subversive agent operating deep behind enemy lines. This, they say, is why he constantly antagonized the religious elite of his day, why he had to speak in hidden parables to obscure the truth from the rulers of this world, why he subtly hinted against traditional marriage and family structures, and ultimately why he and his disciples faced such violent persecution and death. They were literally fighting the ruler of this world. Section 6. The Lifechanyuan Visions. So what does this radical reinterpretation mean for followers today? Well, the text concludes by stating objectively that Shufeng, the founder of the movement, is the modern messenger of the true greatest creator. The source even goes so far as to claim that he is the reincarnation of both Jesus Christ and Buddha, carrying the mantle to finish the cosmic work that was violently interrupted centuries ago. The document outlines a final cosmic covenant involving 3 parts: the greatest creator, Satan, and Shufeng himself. The author claims that his movement is humanity's final course. Interestingly, the text wraps up by assuring readers that Satan actually no longer binds humanity. Rather, humans are now only bound by themselves. It's essentially a call to cast off the old structures and fully embrace this new spiritual era. We've covered a lot of dense, highly controversial ground today, relying strictly on the framework provided by the source. By mapping out this logic, we've traced the path from establishing divine traits all the way to reframing the very identity of Jesus. But it leaves us with a really profound question. If an ancient text can be so radically reinterpreted that it turns an established creator into an adversary, what does that say about the inherently subjective, flexible nature of scriptural truth itself? It's a fascinating concept to wrestle with. Thanks for exploring this explainer with us, and keep seeking clarity.